3 p.m. Ms. Atkinson, when you read the land acknowledgement.
We would like to acknowledge the city and borough of Juneau is on Tlingit land and wish to honor the indigenous people of this land. For more than 10,000 years, Alaska Native people have been and continue to be integral to the well-being of our community. We are grateful to be in this place, a part of this community, and to honor the culture, traditions, and resilience of the Tlingit people. Gunishish.
Thank you, Ms. Atkinson. Madam Clerk, could you call the roll for us just so we can sound check the assembly members?
I think that's a wonderful idea. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Greg Smith,
Present.
Ms. Hughes-Candies,
Here.
Ms. Wall,
Present.
Mr. Steininger,
Present.
Mr. Kelly,
Here.
Ms. Hall,
Here.
Ms. Atkinson,
Here.
and Mayor Weldon.
Here.
And for the record, we do have Assemblymember Bryson excused from tonight's meeting. So quorum is present.
Very good. Thank you, Madam Clerk. Any changes to the agenda? Seeing none, we'll note the agenda is approved. Any changes to the January 25th, 2024 Assembly work session with legislative delegation draft minutes? Seeing none, we'll note those minutes as approved as well. First up on agenda topics, update on Visitor Industry Task Force public process. We have a report by Visitor Industry Director, Ms. Pierce.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can everybody hear me okay?
You are faint to me.
Okay. I have audio issues sometimes with my computer. I'm going to try to really project my voice. So if anybody has a problem hearing, just stick a hand up and I'll just try to yell louder. So I wanted to talk to you tonight about the need to do some more generalized public process around tourism. We were talking about the process for Huna Totem next, and we've done surveys and some other issue-specific outreach. But in March, it will have been 5 years since the VITF report was delivered. And that was a good and respected process. It led to many recommendations. It gave me really clear marching orders on where to focus my energy. And now that we've achieved some of the major recommendations, most of the recommendations really, including ship and passenger limits, I believe it's time to get a similar group back together to build on the great work 5 years ago and update those recommendations. I would plan to work with Mayor Weldon on the composition of that group and would likely hold meetings over the winter within the next few months before the tourism season starts. Does anybody have any questions or feedback on that approach?
Questions from the Assembly? Feedback from the Assembly? And team, just since we're in Zoom world, would you raise your virtual hand? That'll be easier for me to see. Ms. Hughes-Candies.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just in terms of feedback, I'll just say for the benefit of the mayor, since she'll be working with Director Pierce on the composition, that I'll be interested to track that closely or, weigh in when it's appropriate. So if you start adding names, I'd love to know about it.
Ms. Adkins, no, I'm just saying. Ms. Wall, did something for you?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a comment off the top of my head in response to that, which is, it's also a lot has changed in 5 years, and it would be cool to see some fresh faces on that group, and a different composition, just kind of reflecting on what has changed in 5 years. So excited to see where it goes.
Ms. Hughes-Candies.
Thanks for your indulgence, Mr. Chair. I guess that did actually raise a question for me, Director Pierce, are you imagining, with that new group assembled, like the same magnitude roughly of meetings? Or because we kind of want to compress that, I would imagine, in order to kind of get an updated temperature for you from that group. So if you could just comment on that.
Certainly through the chair, I would anticipate a shorter process, fewer meetings, but a robust public discussion, which is really what I believe is important and needed right now.
Very well then.
Ms. Pierce just hit on it. I think the public process is the most important piece. But this group wouldn't have to start at the very, very beginning like the other group did. So they could look at what's actually happening right now and the recommendations that we're already doing and see if we need to add to them rather than starting from scratch. So I would see a shortened season, and yes, we will get the band back together, but it might not be the same members. Well, it won't be the same members. So I hear your comments.
Very good. I would just say it's an important issue to us for a number of reasons. And I also support it and like that we'll continue to have process and engagement with the community on tourism impacts related to tourism. So anything else you need there, Ms. Pierce?
No, Mr. Chair, thank you very much.
Very good. The next item, I believe, is also you, and that's lease process for Huna Totem.
Yes, it is. So indulge me. Sorry, I'm working off of two screens, so I'm not looking away from you if I don't look like I'm looking directly into the camera. So the purpose of the discussion tonight is to establish a public process for a Tidelands lease with Huna Totem. And I'm asking the Assembly for two things: approval to move forward with a public process as outlined in this memo, and for you to articulate the elements of the site that have been discussed to date that the committee thinks has the most community benefit and should be included in the lease that ultimately comes before the full assembly. You will also note a spreadsheet and memo in your packet. These are issues that CBJ staff and other agencies had identified through the conditional use permit process. Many did not ultimately end up in the CUP. Most of these were design concerns that didn't quite rise to the level of being included in a lease, but it was important to track how they're being addressed, and I wanted to demonstrate that we're caring for these elements. This is really informational only, and I'm not requesting any action. Also tonight, we have Susan Bell here from Huna Totem to present the current plan. We also have Sandy Weir from NCL, who flew all the way to Juneau for a Zoom meeting, and she is also here to answer questions. So moving to, sorry, are my slides up?
I do not
That's what
see
I was
them.
just
Okay.
about to
All
ask
right.
is,
Let me
am
share
I
my
supposed to be
screen. I
showing
wasn't
your
sure who was
slideshow
doing
at this
that.
point, Alex? Okay.
Yeah,
No,
I can
thank
share.
you. I will do that right now.
No, I can share
Oh,
my
you
screen.
want to? Okay, that would be great if you would, please.
Yeah, let me. Oh, you can see my whole notes. Let's see. From beginning. All right. Do you see my slide up on the screen?
Yes, we do, along with the next slide and your notes.
Okay, just a second. It's been a minute. I'm rusty. All right, how's this?
Very good, just the slide.
Oh, all right, fantastic. Sorry about that.
Okay.
We're all getting used to being back into Zoom world here. So next up, Where did my, sorry. So just as a brief refresher on where we've been in this process, I also included a link in my memo to the memo that I provided to the Lands, Housing, and Economic Development Committee. Many members of the public believed they were weighing in on this project and throughout the process, and that they were providing their input to the city. So while we do need to do a CBJ-led public process around the lease, I also don't want to lose any of the input that we've received to date. So if you are new to the assembly in the last 2 years, or you need a refresher on the public testimony that you've received, I strongly suggest that you review my previous memo and the links therein. And Susan can talk about whether or not the input that we've received to date has been incorporated into the current plan, and how it's been incorporated. So next up is a proposed project timeline. This is kind of an aggressive version, showing a final reading in April. And then some of the potential criteria. These are some of the elements that have been discussed at various iterations of this project. And I want to know your assembly's deal breakers. Regardless of whether you ultimately choose to approve or deny this lease, my goal is to deliver a final lease to the assembly that doesn't contain any surprises. Ms. Bell addressed the housing issue in her presentation to the Lands, Housing, and Economic Development Committee. And there have been assembly members who have made a strong push for housing on that site in the past, which is why it is still on this list. This is your opportunity to talk about what you think provides community benefit or has the potential to mitigate concerns. And I recommend that we discuss these elements after Ms. Bell presents. She may answer any questions you may have, so just maybe allow it to percolate while she's talking. And Ms. Weir, and I will all be available to answer questions at that point. Which leads me to the proposed public process. We included a question about this project in our annual survey. Results are going to be delayed this year. We usually get them right about now, but we postponed survey outreach until after the presidential election, so we didn't get lost in the noise. So once we have the survey results, we'll present those results at a public meeting where Huna Totem and CBJ will both be present to take public input. We're planning to schedule this meeting in January. And then following that meeting, we will present the final project, final kind of planned design project and the elements that will be included in the lease at a future committee of the whole. I would suggest taking public testimony to give CBJ and Huna Totem staff the opportunity to review and incorporate any final changes before the lease is submitted for public hearing. Again, with that goal of what's going to come before you, no surprises. And then following the COW, of course, we'll schedule the Tidelands lease for public hearing. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'm happy to take feedback on this now, or we can discuss these points following Ms. Bell's presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Pierce. Part of me says we could discuss the public process, but I'd also be open to your direction, and let's do it after. Let's hear from Ms. Bell. Sorry. Yeah, let's hear from Ms. Bell and Huna Totem and NCL, and then we can have all the information and move forward there. So.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I didn't mean to talk over you. There was a little lag in the Zoom.
No problem.
All right. Well, with that, I will turn things over to Susan Bell with Huna Totem Corporation, and we'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you. I first just want to do a sound check, and I'm trying to find a position where, does that work? Okay, I see some thumbs up. Very good. And earlier, the city clerk said that she would share my slides, which I appreciate. And so I'll give a moment for them to come up. And when they do, we can advance to the third slide, which has the map.
My apologies. I'm trying to get the right document to share. So sorry. Here it is. Sorry, it's spinning and doing the thinking thing. Here we go. Okay.
Mayor Weldon, did you have something? Well,
Well, while we were waiting for the clerk, I was wondering if Ms. Weir wanted to introduce herself because we have a new assembly.
Ms. Weir.
We do. Thank you, Mayor Beth. I'm Sandy Weir. I have been with Norwegian Cruise Line since 2005, and I've been in a lot of different roles, but currently I'm doing global government relations and public affairs. And Alaska is one of my favorite places to come and one of my favorite places to work with the community. So I hope that, for those of you that I haven't met, hopefully it will be in the coming weeks and if not days. And I look forward to that. Thank you.
Thank you for being here, Ms. Weir, and sorry we're all on Zoom, even though we're all in Juneau, but you saw the snow and the rain and the streets, so.
I did, and was thankful to have landed last night, but yes, we can't control the weather.
No, we can't. Thanks for being here.
And can everyone see the slide show at this point?
Yes, we can.
Great.
Thanks again, Chairman Smith and Beth. If you will go to the third slide, which has the map, we'll just briefly remind people that we're talking about a site that in our community we commonly call the subport. The map indicates that if you pass the bridge and you're driving into town on your right, where now you would see Tracy's Crab Shack 2 and a gravel lot behind chain link fence right before the Coast Guard, that's the site that we're talking about. The aerial view looking down on this ship shows the adjacent property, and a reminder that this one of the wonderful benefits of this site is the intersection with a traffic signal there at Whittier and Egan. And so, again, looking down at the site, the adjacent property owners are the Coast Guard to the right, KTOO and the Ramada across the street, and Juneau Arts and Culture Center. And just before we leave this slide, just to remind people that on the uplands, there'll be a welcome center, retail, dining, a public park, underground parking, and I'll get into more detail on all of those elements in a moment. Working with Sealaska Heritage as our partners, we'll be creating a new Indigenous Knowledge, Science, and Cultural Center, and also there'll be a floating dock. So we can move to the next slide, which really helps emphasize this will be a distinctive landmark in our community. This view is coming, is giving the perspective of someone on the ship or someone coming from the gangway as it would curve around the bow of the ship, coming into the plaza level of a multi-story facility. Again, it'll be a distinctive site. We'll be incorporating Tlingit culture. The site is designed to really enhance both culture and scenic views. And one of the things that is our goal and also a condition from the Planning Commission process is that this will have year-round use by our residents, by our regional neighbors, business travelers, independent visitors. And a couple of things that I just really want to underscore, and again, we'll get into more detail, is that as we work with Jensen Yorba Wall, one of the key considerations is this pedestrian flow. As passengers come off the ship, they flow easily into the site, to their tours and into the downtown area. There's also safe and efficient vehicle traffic. I've mentioned already that intersection at Whittier Street and the underground parking and the vehicular and passenger flow is designed to be just very safe and efficient. And again, I'll get into more detail on those components in a moment. If we could move to the next slide. I want to spend a moment and talk about the community benefits. Again, I'll talk a little bit more in a couple of slides about the public process that got us to this point. But one of the key elements of this site, and why for many years by Mental Health Trust, by others, this has been looked at for possible uses for cruise ship docks, is this ability to reduce downtown congestion. Unlike our other 4 docks, where every bus and van movement into town has to pass through that Marineway and Franklin Street corridor twice, vehicle traffic will be able to take a left on Whittier Street to get people to the vast majority of their tours. Also, when we have 70 to 80 ships annually at anchor, even in the coming years, when we move ships from anchor to a dock, one of the things that we're doing is moving those lightering vessels that come into Marine Park, which are also adding to the pedestrian and vehicular congestion. We're expanding the Seawalk, and we've seen with every incremental increase of the Seawalk that residents and visitors alike really take to that, and it's helping distribute passengers and people through the downtown core, and it honors the 5-ship limit. Also, there's a strong environmental sustainability element in this. And first of all, one of the things that's, we will be constructing the dock with shore power capability. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But even without shore power, when you take a vessel from being at anchor and bring it to a dock, this varies by weather and it varies by line, but we can reduce up to 40% of emissions just from that move alone. And then there will also be the shore power capability. And again, back to vessels at anchor, those little lightering vessels are also increasing traffic and increasing emissions. So moving to the next slide, I wanted to highlight something that through the course of the last couple of months, as I've stepped into this role with Huna Totem, I have walked this, I have driven it and mapped it, and I've mapped it in Google. And I just wanted to underscore something that that ties into the next couple of points that I have about community benefits. It's a very similar distance. Google called it 0.4 miles, 8 minutes. That's a meander. In my walking pace, it was a little bit faster. But coming from the site into that Marineway, Franklin Street corridor, it's about it's about 0.4 miles. When I walked it, it was 0.35 miles. But that is a very similar distance when you come from the South Franklin dock into that area across from the tram where the retail stores, Trove and the T-shirt company and other things begin. And I think it's important to keep that in mind because when you look at this map, there are retail opportunities on the way. We've got Merchants Wharf, we've got Miners Cove, we've got access to shops on, off of Main Street, beautiful State Museum and other attractions. But again, that distance is very similar. And I think that as we move to the next slide, keeping that in mind, one of the things that, in addition to, I've talked about the pedestrian access into town and the efficiency of moving vehicles away. I was going to speak to the second point here. It increases our economic activity. When we give our visitors easy access into our downtown core, give them the confidence that they're not going to miss the ship or have to stand in line on both sides of the dock, they've demonstrated that they spend more time, more money, and also have higher satisfaction ratings. And I know that from a lot of work that I did in many years at McDowell Group, now McKinley Research, but Huna Totem knows this also from 20 years of experience at Icy Strait Point. When that facility and destination was initially created, the ships were lightering, and now with 2 docks, they're bringing some of the things that they've learned along the way into this project. Also back to when ships are at anchor, you've got passengers moving off and on the lightering vessels. You've got more vessels in the harbor. So again, there's safety and increased economic activity. And moving to the next slide. this unique attraction will have very, very strong cultural representation. I mentioned our partnership with Sealaska Heritage Institute. We're working now on the designs and thinking about the cultural exhibits for the Indigenous Knowledge, Science, and Cultural Center that will have a very strong educational component. We'll be working with the Juneau School District, with UAS. We'll be reinforcing some of the programs like Sealaska's Tlingit Culture and Literacy programs, literacy language. But also there'll be Tlingit culture featured throughout the site. This again is a conceptual drawing, but one of the things that was exciting when Russell and I met with Lee and Rosita recently, one of the 2 totem poles that like the other poles along the Seawalk that will be sited on the at Auk Landing, the pole that is being completed by master carver Wayne Price is nearly complete. So again, there'll be that'll be just one of the elements. There'll be interpretive signage, art, other things. And then also just recognizing how our cultural and event facilities reinforce each other. We'll have great proximity to the State Museum, Juneau Arts and Cultural Center, Elizabeth Peratrovich Hall and Centennial Hall. And again, as passengers are walking or moving into the downtown core, there'll be great line of sight and access to the Walter Soboleff buildings, the Alaska Arts Campus, and the continued development of Tlingit and Haida's Willoughby District. Moving to the next slide. I wanted to take a moment just to talk a little bit more about the underground parking and the pedestrian and vehicular flow, because since we spoke with the Lands Committee, there were some questions from Assembly members and also community members. I've had a chance to share this presentation with a few civic and business groups. So on this side view, you can see from Egan Drive, there'll be a little bit of an incline into that public park. Again, that will be year-round access, a public park. We've had a lot of interest from different festivals and events asking about how that site might be used by residents. We're really excited about that. When you look from the right-hand side of the slide, passengers coming off the cruise ship will come into the plaza level, and there will be escalators and stairwells that bring them down to the tour departure level and down to the Seawalk. We purposely wanted to be sure that people who are walking on the Seawalk and passengers coming off the ship, that there are some distinct spaces and easy access between the two. If you look at that eagle eye view looking down, the first image is looking down on the park and plaza. To the left would be the Indigenous Knowledge, Science, and Cultural Center. And then you can see the gangway to the ship. And below that is, if we could just peel off these layers, is that underground parking. And there's one more on the next slide, just one more image of that, because I know not only is it's a big investment in how this is being put together, but part of, and Beth, if you can go to the next slide, part of this is to be sure that this whole complex is within the height restrictions in this area. So I'll give a moment for the slide to catch up.
Just say internet. When you were just explaining stuff, everything was my
Madam,
If it,
oh, you were coming in choppy to me. Miss Bell, what slide were you wanting to get to? 10?
the next slide has a diagram of the parking. And if it's easier, if we think it's easier, I could share from my screen. I'm just not sure what's best for the assembly.
Very good. We'll give Madam Clerk just a moment to see if we can get through the lag.
Yeah.
Madam Clerk, can you hear us? Looks like we lost her. Ms. Bell, do you have the ability, or can Mr. Barr give
I
you?
do. I
Okay,
do.
let's go that route if that's okay with you.
Sure. Okay, so let me click to where we were. Sorry.
Yep, and we can
Sorry
see
for
the
that. So here's where
slide.
I was just talking about this aerial view and the side view. And then I'm gonna make it so that I don't see my face. This next slide, again, is just one more image of the parking where you can see coming from Egan, taking a right on Whittier, vehicles will be able to drive into the underground parking. There'll be 2 parking levels for vehicles. There'll be 93 vehicle spaces and 24 bus spaces of varying sizes and emergency vehicle access. And again, at this stage, there's been a lot of work with Corey Wall and team at Jensen Yorba Wall. We are still at the conceptual design level. As we move into 2025 and beyond, we will be getting into much more detailed architecture and engineering and design. But again, there were questions after the Lands Committee about how the parking would work, how how this worked with the height restrictions, and I just wanted to be sure that we added a little bit more. As Alex Pierce mentioned, there's been a lot of public process, and I have a couple of slides here, just again underscoring that when Norwegian Cruise Line purchased the property from the Alaska Mental Health Trust Authority, there was a series of meetings to capture public input, and we have some crossover. You know, we've carried that input as NCL gave the property to Huna Totem in 2022. We have a strong relationship with NCL in developments in other locations, including Icy Strait Point and Huna. But also we continued gathering public input through open houses, through meetings, continued working on the conceptual design. And as I mentioned briefly in a prior slide, Huna Totem has really learned a lot through 20 years of operating Icy Strait. While there are some elements, if people have been to Icy Strait previously, you know that if you come off the docks, you don't come into a parking lot, you come into the destination. There's some of the vision that carries, that's been carried into this project, and some of the success that Icy Strait Point has had. But also, this is being designed specifically for this site and for Juneau and our needs in our community. Again, similar to the comments that Alex had in her opening remarks, there have been multiple layers of CBJ input, including the Visitor Industry Task Force. When that group was formed, part of what Mayor Weldon specifically tasked them to think about was a cruise ship dock at this site. The Planning Commission process also was a public process. And there's a number of conditions that reflect that input in the Visitor Industry Task Force recommendations. And I've got a slide in a moment that underscores that. But also, there's been questions and feedback from multiple CBJ departments, including those listed here. The annual resident surveys, I've got 2 slides that I just want to underscore that I think that the Auk Landing project does so much to address some of the things that the residents have been saying they want CBJ to be focused on. The next few items here are just to underscore that there were many agencies, including the Coast Guard and state and other state and federal agencies, that have a role in ensuring that this is a safe and compatible development in our community. And also, excuse me, I just wanted to specifically mention the navigability study. That was a condition that came through the Planning Commission process. We've engaged P&D engineers to work on that. They're working with Marine Exchange, and this will give very specific assurance that the other docks, floatplane traffic, and vessel traffic in that area are compatible with the development. As I mentioned, the Juneau tourism surveys, we're looking forward to seeing the results from this year. But in 2022, a new question was asked that was, as residents have an opportunity through the survey to talk about the impacts in specific areas, that, in different ways that they're impacted. In 2022, a new question was asked where they had an opportunity to say what they thought should be high, medium, and low priorities for CBJ to be addressing. And you can see in this slide with the kind of burgundy color, which is the high priority, the top thing that residents focused on was the 5-ship limit, reducing congestion, and shore power. There were some other items in the list, but I just wanted to highlight those top things. And in 2023, with the 5-ship limit already in the works, the top items were reducing congestion, shore power, growing our independent traveler market, and managing impacts throughout the borough. So again, we feel that the Ock Landing development does a lot to really address the things that we've seen in the survey, we've seen in tourism best management practice issues, and they've been raised for years, and in our planning processes. So specifically, looking at the Visitor Industry Task Force recommendations, and they tackled a number of issues, but on the topic of a cruise ship port at this site, there were some, these are paraphrased a little bit, but there were some very specific recommendations about 1 large cruise ship per day, a maximum of 5 large ships in port, no hot berthing at the new facility, a high quality uplands development, year-round development, a management agreement with CBJ, and electrification of the dock. And as I've had a chance to share this presentation with Rotary groups and Downtown Business Association, I've made a connection between this and the Planning Commission approvals and conditions, because I think a lot of public, they take the time to comment, they take the time to attend meetings, and I think this is a really good example of seeing how that time and input and that deliberation from the task force is being carried forward in the CBJ process. So again, the conditional use permits, you see that a lot of those things, in addition to development of the Seawalk, an easement for CBJ, maintenance of the parks, paths and landscaping, and that navigability study. So again, I've enjoyed, as I've had a chance to talk about this project, pointing to that public input being applied by the community. So as I comment on my last slides, I just wanted to talk about, that's how we got to where we are today. We're looking forward to the public process that we have ahead of us. We look forward to accomplishing the Tidelands lease. We agree with a request from the Ports and Harbors in the city that the city will lead on the state-owned submerged lands, which means that eventually those revenues will flow to the city. We have 2 agreements that are drafted now, and we're working on finalizing them with both the Coast Guard and AEL&P regarding the property and the derelict dock that it is close to us. The main thing with these 2 agreements is that we want to work well with our adjacent property owners. We want to have strong communication, coordination, and make sure that we're respectful of each other's needs and uses. But one of the things with AEL&P is that in that agreement, that again, we're still finalizing both of these, but we have proposed that while we are underway with construction, removing that derelict dock so that that will be a safety enhancement and a community service. There's much work ahead. Again, I've underscored a couple of times in the comments that some of what we're at is a conceptual stage of design. So there's a lot of engineering, architectural work and design and planning ahead of us. As I highlighted in my previous slides, there are a number of city, state, and federal processes and permits that we need to secure. And it's our hope that as we work through this process with the city, that we're able to initiate construction in early 2025 so that we can complete the dock in 2027. In part, again, Alex mentioned in her comments, this has been a number of years getting to the point that we're at, but also some of the things that we can do with this dock and hearkening back to the community benefits, I think will have an immediate benefit for our community in congestion and enhancing the guest experience. So with that, I just have a thank you. I'll stop sharing and I look forward to any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Bell. Questions from the assembly? I expect us to just, we can ask questions of Ms. Bell and Ms. Weir, and then I'd imagine we'll shift into deliberations on, the guidance staff's requested, but if we need to pull them back, we could, but if we have questions for these two right now, now is the time. Mayor Weldon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Bell and Ms. Weir for being here tonight. Looking back at your slide called underground parking, I'm a little concerned about the Seawalk. I know the conditional use permit touches on it, but it looks like you're either running it through retail space, which is Disney-esque, Disneyland-esque, which I'm not too fond of, or through outdoor dining, and I'm a little concerned about that. So when you look at actual designing, please care for that. And I'll have another question, but I'll let others ask one first.
Okay.
And through the chair, Mayor Weldon, thanks for that. And I think that we can work on it. They're on two different levels. The passengers come into the plaza level, and the Seawalk will be contiguous with the so that passengers can choose to go to the Seawalk, residents who are walking on the Seawalk, and other non-cruise visitors. There's clear separation. It's not Seawalk runs through retail. Thank you.
Ms. Hughes Candies.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks for being here to you both and for that presentation. Question related to the Coast Guard, and speaking about the navigability study, you said the Coast Guard would have a role in that to make sure it worked with the Coast Guard. And you also referenced at the end the agreement that you were working on finalizing, and that was more in reference, you said, to having good relationships with your neighbors. I guess my question is, if you could clarify, when we'll have like a hard line, when I say a hard line, like a hearty yes from the Coast Guard that the way it's designed, the way it's built is not going to impact the Coast Guard. And I am, of course, thinking about icebreakers.
Through the chair, and thank you, Representative Hughes Candies, or Assembly Member Hughes Candies. Thanks for helping give me a chance to clarify that. First of all, the navigability study, as I pointed out, is required through the conditional use permit. We've contracted with P&D engineers and the Marine Exchange, and it's very specific to address the Coast Guard's dock and the other docks in the area, the floatplane traffic and any vessel traffic, especially large traffic that's transiting near the bridge. So that will be a document that when it's complete, we will share to demonstrate that we've completed the study, and it will give the assurances that you're seeking. With the Coast Guard, also, there's a little bit of overlapping land there. It's a secure site. There's some things that we need to be respectful of their needs. When it comes to the icebreaker itself, I think there's a lot that's not known about the design and the needs of the icebreaker and the upland needs, but and it may not be that, just given the weight and the, that dock or that vessel may not be something that docks at Auk Landing, but one of the things the Coast Guard has expressed is an interest in things like buoy tenders, or where NOAA previously had vessels, where there's an adjacent dock, just kind of moving in towards town. So again, I think that our commitment is to be sure that the Coast Guard's needs and other and other docks are that everybody has safe and appropriate access, and that there's enough space in the harbor for all of that. So again, we will be sharing that navigability study as soon as it's completed. We only recently let that contract with P&D.
Okay, thank you.
Very good. I'm gonna jump in front of you, Mayor Weldon. Ms. Bell, one desire I have for the development is, and I think a number of us do, is year-round use, and you mentioned that. I guess a couple of things that I saw on the list from Ms. Pierce and from your notes, I guess, I guess my questions are, is the cultural center intended to be run year-round? And I don't know what kind of guarantees you can give us on that, but that's one. And then is housing not, if housing is not a viable option at this site, could you tell me why?
Thank you for those questions. First of all, on year-round use, I think one of the things I wanted to stress with the Indigenous Knowledge, Science and Cultural Center, our intention of working with the school district and the university as part of not only strengthening cultural knowledge and education in our community, but also underscoring that year-round use. I think as we look to our vendors, particularly in retail, dining, maybe other smaller organizations, we'll be looking for people that can help us meet that year-round mission. The full site, there may be elements of the site that are, not all of it is year-round, but we'll be looking for that. We'll be looking for that commitment as I said, with retail and dining vendors. People have begun reaching out to us already and are excited about that. And we haven't delineated the process for determining it. But again, it's, we want this to be a driver. We want this to be, something that is, something that's valued by residents as well as our visitors. On housing, thanks for the opportunity to address that. That's something that we know is an interest in our community. We've looked at that specifically and feel that it's not compatible for several reasons. One of them is we have very specialized and expensive construction in this waterfront site. There will not only be pilings for the dock, but there will be very deep pilings for the uplands. And as we construct that pad and the underground parking, our construction costs, even for that, are going to be about $1,000 a square foot. So as we continue to build on top of that, the revenue generation is going to have to help pay for that investment in the foundation. So there's a cost. It's also one of the things that, as we've designed it right now, we're within the height limit in that area, and housing would cause us to go higher or forego other revenue generating opportunities. We recognize the parking needs of housing are different from what we've designed. And again, a compatibility with the Coast Guard. It's a secure site. And so for a number of reasons, as we've explored that, and it's not something that we're pursuing in the development at this time.
Very good. Thank you. Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. I didn't want to jump in front of the mayor, though. I think she might have had her hand raised before me.
She already had a question, so you jump right ahead.
Okay.
We'll get back to her. Yeah.
I just wanted to follow up on her response to one of your questions. So when it comes to year-round, to running year-round, do you feel like would you be, I assume you'd probably be operating at a loss, maybe not, because you mentioned you would have some community partners possibly interested as well, but how confident are you that it will be sustainable in the foreseeable future to operate year-round?
Through the chair, thank you, Paul. We know it's an expectation. We believe that the Indigenous Knowledge, Science and Cultural Center goes a long way, and we know Sealaska has kept, as they've spoken to, the assembly previously in support of the facility, and as our partner, we know that they've demonstrated the ability to keep the Walter Soboleff building and the Arts Plaza open year-round. So again, I think that will be an area that our programming and our cultural exhibits and our desire to work with schools and all different kinds of visitors will be an anchor. I think that will also help reinforce back to the retail and food and beverage operators, that we select as partners for this, that will lease space from us. We'll be looking for people that can share that commitment. So again, we know it's an expectation, and we want to deliver on that.
Thank you.
Ms. Wall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Bell and Ms. Weir for being here. My questions and some of the things I'll be paying attention to have to do with that number one community priority around congestion. I know that it is kind of easy for us to imagine a world where we are taking, people who are concentrated in one area and spreading them out more, and that's going to help. But this is also just a different part of town with different traffic patterns. And, I am no traffic expert, and I'm definitely kind of curious about, I know a further study on that is going to be required. What timeline is that on? And what are your kind of current issues or concerns or questions about traffic that you all are grappling with in that kind of desire to help make sure this creates less congestion instead of more?
Through the chair, thank you, Assemblymember Wald. I am excited about being able to deliver the traffic impact analysis from Dowell Engineering soon. I've had a chance in the time that I've been with Huntototem to see the draft. In the memo, we made a few references to the study, or not in the draft, but in the memo, responding to questions from the city and other agencies. So I think that as we're able to release that, which is imminent, it will answer a lot of questions. And again, part of, some of you know that my origins in coming to Juneau were in 1987. I was working on the docks. I think there were months that went by that I didn't leave like a 2-block area, because we only had in 1987 2 docks. I lived in Marine View. My office was kind of up above Cirque. And then there was Heritage Coffee, so anyway, part of what has been fun about this project, and why I say that, is I feel like I'm coming back full circle to really thinking about the traffic logistics, visitor needs, working with industry partners that I've had a long relationship with. And again, this site is so part of what's just a really a wonderful benefit about what's already in existence, is that signalized intersection at Whittier and Egan. And that just wonderful, easy pedestrian access into the downtown, into some parts of downtown that, as ships have moved, ships and docks have moved towards South Franklin and AJ, there are businesses that are longtime Juneau businesses and new businesses that will benefit from pedestrian traffic, into that part of town. And again, that, the vehicular traffic being able to turn left at Whittier, take people to the glacier and to the other sites, whale watching, and then bring them back. It saves, in addition to just not adding to the congestion it's been estimated that saves about 8,400 bus trips annually through the downtown. I didn't do that work myself, but as I've been pouring through all kinds of information, that's a number that, that was in my predecessor's work. So again, whether it's 8,400 or not, it's thousands of bus trips that are not having to go through town. So it reduces the congestion, and it just gives people more time. If they can get to their tour and back, they can enjoy more of Juneau.
Ms. Bell, Ms. Pierce, did you have a response to something that was stated earlier?
I did, Mr. Chair, if I may. Just in response to Assemblymember Wall's question, I had some pretty significant concerns with the traffic study as initially submitted. I didn't think that it took into account how cruise ship operations actually work. It kind of considered buses trickling in and out through the day instead of like 50 buses being there when the ship arrives, and then operations slowing down. From what I understand from the updated traffic study, which I have not yet seen, and my discussions with Ms. Bell, those have been addressed, and some of my concerns about signaling at Egan have been addressed. So I do have some confidence that they've read our concerns and that they're listening and working to incorporate them into the updated study. And I'm really looking forward to seeing the updated version.
Thank you for that. Mayor Weldon.
Thank you. And this is actually not my second question. And since everybody's talking now, I have 3 questions. This was actually a follow-up to Ms. Hughes Scandy's question that she asked so long ago. So not only do we need to care for the icebreaker, because typically the buoy tenders and the icebreaker shouldn't be there at the same time, but we just need to make sure that we're not impacting our dock. We can't put cruise ships there, and of course the float plane traffic there. So, but that was that. And so I'll ask one of my first 2. The memo mentions water access, but I didn't see any water access on the slide. Were you caring for that, or is that something that didn't work into the plans?
Through the chair, Mayor Weldon. One of the things that I think as we talk more specifically with CBJ about the possibility of it while we're building Auk Landing and the seawalk that is contiguous to the Auk Landing site, there's the potential for us to cooperate together in continuing seawalk. It would be and that I think gives us the ability to think about beach access and how that might tie in. At this time, we're committed to the seawalk that is on the south and west side, and there's some specific requirements about the width and an easement for CBJ. But again, I think that as we're mobilizing for this project, there could be some great cost efficiencies and planning efficiencies for working with CBJ and thinking about how we might bring people as we see as you get closer to the whale, there's some lovely beach access, just a little bit further up the dock. So again, I think there's some opportunity for cooperation there.
Ms. Pierce.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just to follow on to that, in the original NCL design, there was some water access contemplated. It was on the CBJ portion of the seawalk that was included in those renderings, but it was one of the elements that was discussed in public process multiple times. So I wanted to make sure to include it. I didn't want it to feel like it was overlooked.
I had a question. Somewhere in the notes, I think you talk about the demolition or anyway, something with the AJT dock. You'll remove it, and then I guess that site I know has been evaluated or thought of for a small boat harbor or small cruise ships or something. And I guess can you share with us your plans for that area? Because it looks like you would own those tidelands, or AJT would. But anyway, I'm just kind of thinking I just would like to continue to potentially see some opportunity along that tideland area, and I'm just curious about what you were thinking afterwards.
Thank you, Chairman. The dock that we're talking about is the Alaska Juneau Mining Trust dock, and AELMP is the parent company, or Avista is. But in our MOU, which I think we're getting very close to being able to finalize, what we're proposing to do, I mean, although it's one of the docks that is going to be addressed in the navigability study, but it is derelict. It is a safety concern. And while it's standing, it's going to preclude, and there's an expense to removing it too. But with it removed, it helps open up more possibilities for what might happen to that site for recreation, for future development. So again, although we haven't finalized the MOU with AELMP, Alec Mezek is comfortable with us saying that, a key component is, we're proposing to remove that, not just, as I said, for, it has a number of community benefits, including safety.
Very good, thank you. Ms. Pierce.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And should this project move forward, CBJ would, of course, be very interested in extending the seawalk. That's long been a community priority. And at that time, staff would engage the assembly on the elements of that development, whether it would just be a regular seawalk like we see or like we're contemplating on the Franklin to AJ side, or whether it would include things like water access or marina type components or anything like that. That would be a future assembly discussion.
Thank you. Mayor Weldon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm glad you touched on working with AEL&P Avista. Because what do you mean by electrifying the dock? And the reason I'm asking this question is we certainly don't want you to show up on the street with a plug-in in your hand, because any infrastructure AEL&P needs to do to make the electricity happen down your dock would of course be on the burden of the taxpayers, unless NCL and others are agreeable to having marine passenger fees there. So could you talk about what you mean by electrify the dock?
Through the chair, thank you, Mayor Weldon. So first of all, as we're working on the design of the dock and the uplands, it will be designed with the capability of shore power. And that is an advantage, because I know the city is looking at electrifying the city-owned docks, and it's a little harder to do coming back after it's completed. So one, we're planning in the design and construction for it to have the shore power capability. Two, in our conversations with AEL&P, we're learning a lot about electrification, including the fact that the transformer that is needed for the site will probably be $2 million or more. It will probably be a 2-year long lead item. There's been a lot of focus around the world about electrification. Juneau was a pioneer in electrifying docks, but this is a long lead item. We also understand that AEL&P would likely bring power to this dock from the bridge, and the planning commission in the conditional use permit has some very specific language that the dock needs to be electrified within 24 months of a sufficiently sized power line coming within 25 feet. So there's some specific recommendations, but part of what we're doing now is trying to understand what those costs are, what the lead time is. There's a construction season, a summer construction season also needed in bringing the power there, and looking to see if there are grants or other ways that we can get all of that put together so that we can really have shore power, ships using the shore power as soon as possible. So we're learning what that cost and construction timeline would be, and also looking for opportunities as CBJ also looked for some grant funds. We're looking to see how we can put that whole package together.
Very good. Ms. Bell, this is too detailed or whatever, let me know, and I'm sorry if you've ever covered it before. For your traffic impact analysis, do you know the size of the ship or the passenger and crew amount for that analysis?
Thank you. Because Norwegian Cruise Line is going to be our anchor tenant and is our, in helping, not only acquiring the lot, but helping us construct the dock. One of the things that was done early in the process, and this preceded me, is a lot of examination of the traffic patterns, both pedestrian and vehicular, at the AJ dock and other docks. So there was, we're looking at the largest ships that Norwegian Cruise Line brings into our community, and considering what that means in terms of bus traffic and pedestrian traffic. And so again, we want to be sure that it's grounded. DOWL has their state and federal requirements that they're working to make sure that the traffic study adheres to that. But we also have some on the ground experience that Jensen Yorba Wall and DOWL and others did to just make sure that this they know how things operate. And Alex mentioned a few moments ago that, she witnessed from the draft to now, finalizing that there's been, a little more application of that real life experience on the, about how ships operate in the traffic study. The other thing I just want to appreciate, Department of Transportation was able to give Dowell some more specific information about signal timing, both at 10th and Whittier. I mean, at 10th and Egan and Whittier and Egan, and that helped them get even more precise in the study. So again, I think moving from the draft that Alex and others may have seen to what will be the final product, I think will be a very good representation of the ships that we have in our community.
Okay, very good. And just to confirm kind of what I heard you say, the traffic impact analysis was based on, actual traffic data from the AJ doc. So, and probably with a larger Bliss or something like that over there, but not based on a 6. Anyway, okay. Very good. Thank you. Other questions, Mayor Weldon?
Sorry, I'm being the pest today. So Norwegian cruise ships won't be there all the time. Who are you looking at having there, or is that just going to be part of the big scheduling mess, for lack of better terms?
Well, through the chair, Mayor Weldon. Well, there's a couple of layers that that will go into the scheduling. One, we will want to first accommodate our anchor tenant, Norwegian Cruise Line. We'll want to enhance revenue opportunities for the vendors that are our partners at the site. So we'll be soliciting docs, but I also fully appreciate that the scheduling process is a giant puzzle of, there's many 7-day itineraries, but not all the ships are that. So I know that Cruise Line Agencies has a role. I also know now with the cap on number of ships and daily passenger caps that there's also going to be a look at what is the cumulative traffic across the entire port and how does this work? So again, we'll want to enhance revenues. We'll also, in doing that, be able to reduce congestion and create some other community benefits. So there's a few hands that will be in the process, but we will be seeking additional clients.
You're good. Miss Candies. Maybe.
Maybe we'll see. We'll try it. I'll just follow up on thank you, Mr. Chair. Following up on that idea, there's a lot of things at play, and Director Pierce is always navigating each year we have our cruise ship, 5-ship limit, and we have our passenger agreement that went through. In the original recommendations, the CBJ managing the dock to some extent through a public-private partnership or management agreement. I am hearing you and knowing that you have to seek other tenants and that you have to plan what that operation looks like to make sure that it's a viable operation for you. I was just wondering, do you have any other, knowing that you'll comply with the other stuff, do you have any other comments about that CBJ management element?
Through the chair, thank you, Assemblymember Hughes Candies. We talked about this briefly at the Lands Committee, and I appreciate the question because I think that this dock is unique. That the other docks were developed in a different time in our community, and so I think that the Visitor Industry Task Force and their recommendations, which have been woven into the Planning Commission, the conditional use permit conditions, which I touched on them, the 1 ship a day, no hot berthing, no lightering, construction of the seawalk, the easement, year-round operations, and those are ongoing things that it's a unique relationship between a private dock and the city. And I also, as we go forward through this process, considering the lease, there may be some other items that come through that I think will constitute that management agreement. So it's a unique relationship and I think, this is probably, I think this is probably all I have to say on that, but it's an opportunity for our community. We've been a pioneer with shore power, pioneer with TBMP, pioneer with these ship limits and passenger limits. You know, I hope that as we come through this process in the coming months, that we're pioneering something that is mutually beneficial for the community and for the developers.
Thank you.
Sorry, Mayor Weldon.
I know you're used to me just having my mic on all the time and speaking freely. Last question, and Ms. Huskenny's kind of triggered this one too. Are you anticipating any need for marine passenger fees on any part of this operation, including the seawalk going around the building?
To the chair, Mayor Weldon, constructing the seawalk is part on the two sides of Auk Landing. Is part of the conditions from the conditional use permit. I do think that as we consider cooperation about possible extension on CBJ land and other lands, that may be a place for passenger fees to build the seawalk in the adjacent site. I think I'm correct that the seawalk that we know and enjoy now has been built with passenger fees. But it is a condition that Huna Totem constructs the seawalk on the west and south side. That's immediately adjacent to our property.
Very good. Seeing no other questions from the assembly, Ms. Bell, Ms. Weir, thank you for being here. I think we may move you back into attendee mode as we do deliberations, but maybe hang tight just in case we have questions and want to bring you back. Assembly members, we've got an hour and 15 minutes. Should we take a 5-minute break or keep rolling? Break, 5 minutes. Be back at 7:20, please. Thank you.
10 minutes.
See you at 7:20. I believe everyone's back. So now we've heard from Huna Totem, we've heard from Ms. Pierce. I think so my understanding is that staff wants direction on two things: public process and lease conditions. Ms. Pierce, do you have a preference on which, or maybe let's just go after public process? How does that sound?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that's the more straightforward piece of this. The assembly members have requested a robust public process in the past. I want to make sure that this amount of opportunity for public input hits the mark. So I welcome your feedback or a motion to move this forward.
Very good. And Ms. Pierce, in terms of what you're kind of proposing, is it that slide packet page 24, a public survey, public meeting, a cow with possible public testimony and then a public hearing?
Yeah, correct.
Okay, very good. Questions or comments from the assembly on the proposed public process?
Mr. Chair, just so I make sure I am looking at the right thing. You said that's packet page 24.
Yes.
Okay.
I don't know if useful to bring it up, Ms. Pierce.
And I have, oh, you got it. I was gonna say I haven't now. I don't know.
Did you have a question at all, Ms. Huskenny? Or good. Okay, Mr. Steininger.
Ms. Pierce, when you were on an earlier slide, the project timeline, you moved through it really quick. And I guess my question on this proposed public process, would it be kind of following the project timeline that you had here? It's kind of these milestones of public meeting, public survey aren't really addressed in the timeline. Do you have a little more information on just kind of for the public what to expect on when these things would happen?
I do, and through the chair, the in the timeline, which should be up on your screen now, the survey will conclude. We'll have results in January. At that time, we'll schedule a public meeting. I want to make sure that we have the survey results available to present to the public. So I don't have an exact meeting date pending those results. And then following that, we would work with Huna Totem to discuss the elements that the public wanted to see. Kind of similar question to what we're asking the assembly. What are important community elements that should be included? What kind of matters the most to the community on this site? And then we would bring this back to a COW likely in February or March. I don't, and that may push depending on everything from your schedules and other meeting agenda topics to success of the public process and how quickly our discussions with Huna Totem move. So I've been a little bit squishy on that, and why I caveated the timeline for an April public hearing as aggressive, but a good goal to move forward on this and not let it dry out for too long.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Weldon.
Thank you. The only concern that I see is on the public meeting, the open house. So I don't care if it's back to back, but I think you should give 2 opportunities for the public to see the project. So whether we're looking at a Friday night and a Saturday afternoon or a Sunday afternoon and a Monday night, I don't care, but it seems to me like 2 opportunities is a little more fair than 1.
Through the chair, noted and recorded.
Ms. Hughes Candies.
Okay, sorry about that. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Madam Mayor. You took the words out of my mouth. So same thought. And the only other thing I would say about the public meeting, that's kind of a question slash, I'll just say what would be my preference. And I think in the public's mind, I get questions sometimes, like I get stopped in the store where people can't keep track. With the COVID years, nobody's sense of time is very good, and they feel like this project has been going on kind of forever because they saw it from Norwegian, but Norwegian was getting public comment like literally over Zoom, and then like a First Friday thing from Huna Totem. And I think in the public meetings, saying kind of like, here's the concept and what are the community aspects that are important to you? Are there things about you love or you hate? That's good to know. But let's also please just make it really clear, like, and now this 5-year process is like, if you don't want this to happen, we're talking about like actually ripping off the Band-Aid. So like that they also get a sense of where it sits in the city's public process separate from that. And I think that could just be part of that same meeting. It's just how we present the thing to say, you are here, and then this is like finish line close, so that they decide what to do appropriately. Thanks.
Thank you,
Madam-
Ms. Hughes-Candies, and through the chair, I had envisioned before tonight even having a timeline of kind of where we've been, and then, decision point. This is the Assembly's opportunity to approve or deny.
just really briefly, I feel like we maybe lost Miss Adkisson, but
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We did, she rejoined and then we lost her again. She's trying to rejoin via her phone right now.
okay. Should probably pause. I just saw her rejoin in attendees.
Okay, hopefully she is back in panelist mode in just a moment here.
Very good. I see you there. Miss Adkisson, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. I'm sorry. My computer has decided to shut down twice on me, so I'm on my iPad now.
Okay, very good. Glad to have you back. Miss Hall.
Yeah, a couple question or a question on the public process. So the survey and then a meeting, possibly back-to-back public meetings. Will this also incorporate all prior public input on the project, or how will this information be compiled? This be a question for Ms. Pierce.
Ms. Pierce.
Thank you, and through the chair, I'm so the survey does not compile information. It's a snapshot. Do you yes, no on the project, public, and then the elements that we discussed and are going to discuss again. The public meeting, I am planning to include a summary of the process to date and opportunity for people to kind of learn about how this has moved through the process and the iterations that the project has seen over the last 5 years. To ask a question, were you hoping for something that had kind of compiled public record to date as a final output, or were you hoping to ensure that in the public process we're referencing the public meetings that we've done or the public process to date?
Yeah, I guess as new to the assembly, I would be interested to see all and I do see that in the one document shared by whom, well, on in this packet, you know, of many of the concerns that have been raised and how they've been addressed. So that will all be part of the sort of final public, well, yeah, I guess it will be, it's out there, but just being able to easily access what all the concerns have been to this point would be helpful.
Very good. I'll hop in really quick.
Chair, I've noted that
sorry.
feedback, and I'll find a way to represent that in a way that's easily digestible for the assembly.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. Pierce. I had one, Ms. Pierce. So on the cow step or the presentation of final project proposal, are you envisioning, like, at that point bringing a piece of draft legislation? And I have to admit, I don't know if a tidelands lease is a resolution or an ordinance, and then potentially, you know, you're proposed to maybe have something kind of written up in a pretty final form, then take public testimony. The assembly could amend it and then send it in for actual introduction. Is that kind of what you're seeing it? Or
Mr. Chair, that's correct.
very good. Thank you. Ms. Uscandies, did you have another question?
No, I did not. Sorry about that.
Yeah. Any other questions from the committee? I guess the one thing I maybe heard, and maybe if someone's going to make a motion, it was kind of like maybe having multiple public meetings as opposed to public meeting. Okay. Mr. Kelly, a question.
Just to you, Mr. Chair, is it your intention after we finish discussing the public process that we will also be providing direction on the Thailand lease agreement?
Yes.
Thank you.
Very good. Mayor Weldon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Are you ready for a motion?
I am. I'm
I
not.
move, I move to direct staff to initiate a CBJ-led public process incorporating the notes that we told the visitor industry director tonight for a Tidelands lease with Huna Totem Corporation, and ask for unanimous consent.
Very good. And again, the public meetings was the big note, but Ms. Pierce probably had captured some other pieces too. So any objection to that motion? Seeing none, that motion is adopted. Thank you. Okay. Now moving on to the potential lease conditions. Questions from the assembly, Mr. Kelly.
Actually, I had comments or direction, so if there's other people who have questions, I can wait.
Very good. Any questions from the assembly? I had one. I guess this may not make sense, but I'm just wondering, like, is requiring year-round operation, or is that a reasonable condition of a lease, of a Tidelands lease?
Mr. Chair, I would defer to Ms. Wright on whether that's something that we can actually legally do.
Thank you, Mr. Thank you, Mr. Mr. Chair, I actually will have to look into that. My initial response is that there may be some problems with requiring the year-round piece, but I can't give you a definitive answer right now. I'm happy to get back to everyone on that one.
No, that's okay. And I guess maybe just while I have you, I mean, the Tidelands lease are, how long are they again? And then how long do they typically last for?
So typically they're 10 years. There, as you remember, there have been 35 and 55-year leases, but the Assembly in general has moved away from those 55, and in recent history has been going towards the 10 and 35-year leases. And then there's that additional piece of whether you give an opportunity to renew one time.
Very good. Mr. Steininger.
So my question is kind of on previous leases that we've done for similar projects. I know they're, a pretty far distance in the past, and this is kind of a project with a much bigger scope than, the South Franklin or AJ docks. But what kind of, lease stipulations and conditions do we place on those? Were they of, kind of similar nature that got into the kind of day-to-day operations of the business looking to build a development in that location, or were they more, general?
Thank you, Mr. Steininger, and through the chair, they were a lot more general. The Tidelands lease for the AJ dock is actually with the state. It's not with the city. And the conditional use permit for the AJ dock is, I would call it thin. On the Franklin dock, we do have lease conditions for things like no lightering to the dock. Some of the things that we're considering here, but that dock was constructed in 2001 when our relationship with the visitor industry was really different. And so to answer your question, this is a lot more detailed than anything that we've done before, and also not really typically how we do city leases. Usually when you see a city lease associated with, say, a conditional use permit, it's like we're selling them a little sliver of land or something like that. We're not doing a major development that's has a lot of public interest and major implications for the downtown waterfront. So kind of a unique animal here, and not really something that we've entirely done before.
Thank you. Ms. Wall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is about kind of the, two pieces that are listed here that I know are important, but maybe won't be in a lease, but curious about them. So when we talk about the navigability issues and we talk about the congestion issues, I know there'll be kind of studies done, and maybe those are just things that when we get to the decision point, we decide, are we satisfied or not? Or there are potentially things that, we could require within a lease. Do you have any thoughts, Ms. Pierce, on kind of the right ways to care for those items, if not through a lease?
Thank you, and through the chair, this is something that I grapple with as well. The navigability study is largely the purview of the Coast Guard. Docks and harbors would obviously have a review element. I feel that through the Coast Guard, that's being cared for in a pretty robust way. As for the traffic study, because there was, I had discomfort with the traffic study that the Planning Commission approved. I think it would be reasonable to ensure that we're satisfied with a traffic study before signing a lease. And that could either happen, here at this level, or it could be incorporated into the lease document. I think it's just, if that's something that the Assembly wants to see again, I can make sure that it comes back and that you're satisfied before moving forward with a lease.
Mr. Kelly.
All right, thank you. My Zoom is being a little slow on unmuting, so thanks for your patience. I guess one thing I would want to know is there a way in negotiating this lease? I found it encouraging that they mentioned in the presentation that they are interested in honoring the 5-ship limit and honoring passenger limits. Is there a way to care for that in the lease as a kind of, we already have the MOU, but can any of that also be cared for in the lease?
Ms. Pierce.
Through the chair, something again that I would want to make sure we're legally comfortable doing that, because we would be bringing these MOA agreements then into a lease document. I think I would want to make sure that we're able to do that. That said, we can maybe look at how we could frame something around honoring commitments between the city and the cruise industry that doesn't get into specifics, but I would want to work with our legal team on that beforehand.
Thank you.
Mayor Weldon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm at a, I didn't read the conditional use permit before I came, and according to Hunatotom's document, they say that it does address 1 large cruise ship per day, no hot berthing, no lightering, and year-round operations. So I don't know if that's true. Ms. Wright, would you care for that? And also, my main question is, can we move forward on a lease with condition of I don't know the right word, successful navigational study that we can do anything? Is that something that works? I'd imagine that's going to be their slowest piece.
So through the chair, all of those things are in the conditional use permit. the navigation study, part of the issue with the navigation study and the conditional use permit is that just by the way the conditional use permits work, all of the conditions are things that will be accomplished before a building permit is issued. And issuance of a building permit is like way after we would want a navigation study. And so we could work on a navigation study deadline or something like that that's further forward than a conditional use permit, but maybe would be like I'll let our attorney address how that looks. In the conditional use permit itself, it does say no lightering, no hot berthing, and all of that, but it has only one side per day, but it has the VITF language of for ships over 900 or 500 passengers or something. I think it is 500. It's either 500 passengers or 950 passengers. I would want to remove that language and just say no lightering, no hot berthing, period. Or, that's something that I know that Huna Totem and NCL recognizes how we expect them to operate the facility, but that is something that we may want to clean up from the conditional use permit process.
Mrs. Candies.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I raised my hand intending to make sure that I fully understood. I was going to restate, and now I am a little bit more like applesauce. So as we have the date that we know it's going to take a bit to get the navigability study. Similarly, we have a traffic impact study. We know that gets done when it gets done. So am I understanding correctly, Ms. Pierce, you're saying it's fine to wait for those things before you sign a lease, but you wouldn't necessarily put them in the lease. You'd know what you wanted out of them, and you'd wait till you got what you wanted out of them. Is that correct? All right, Tab.
Through the chair, that is correct, though I will say that I believe that the traffic study will come very shortly. So I don't think that's something that we're waiting for external of the lease. My point about the navigability study is that it's more the purview of the Coast Guard than us. But there were some elements that Docks and Harbors wanted to make sure were included.
Okay. And can I have a follow-up, Mr.
Yes.
Smith? For you mentioned which language you'd remove that wasn't super specific about from the VITF. You take that out just to make it clear that this is and they already expect to operate that way anyway. I'm curious if you could expand a little bit, Mr. Kelly's question about putting in, 5-ship limit or, X passengers a day into the lease. I think you had referenced something about the legalities of it. But if you could expand why it wouldn't be better to have more specific versus something vague, because my feeling is like vague is easier to, like, you might violate the spirit, but there's no real clear letter of the law. So
Through the chair, thank you for the opportunity to clarify on that last point. I think what I had intended to convey was that if we have the 5-ship limit, 16,000 passengers a day in the lease, and then that changes, and we have new agreements, or a new agreement with the cruise lines happens, or something else down the road, then we have to open up the lease. And so that was my concern, more than not wanting to include specifics in the lease. And I know Ms. Wright has her hand up and may have some light to shed on this, and I would be interested to hear from her as well.
Ms. Wright, sorry for not acknowledging you further as we had a legal question, but yes, thankfully we got it. Someone gave you another shot at another chance for me to call on you. So please.
Thank you. And now I don't know how to, I can lower my hand. There it is. Okay. So first I'll start. I did have, 5 minutes there to take a look to answer Mr. Smith's question about adding into the lease the year-round usage. And I think that you can do that. I am comfortable saying that you could put that in. And as the mayor pointed out, that was also brought forward in other places. So you're good to go on that. You know, what I would say to the question about the MOAs that are currently in effect with the cruise ships, if you take a look at them, and Ms. Pierce can help me on the language, I believe that they specifically say they are not legal contracts, right? So they are not enforceable in a court of law. They are agreements, they are policies, they are, you know, good faith, kind of written out, this is what we want. Your lease is a fully legally binding contract. So you can put anything you want in there that you want the Huna Totem to be bound by. I also think that while it is a process to modify a lease, you certainly can do it. So if something came up and Ms. Pierce and others, you know, through this process wanted to change that or make a recommended change, you couldn't probably go, you know, I wouldn't see that Huna Totem would agree to anything that was like worse for them, but maybe if something was better, they would, but you certainly can renegotiate the lease midterm as well. So I think that you should feel very comfortable setting forth the conditions that you believe the community needs.
And Mr. Chair, if I may add to that, one thing that I would caution, I agree that specificity is good. That said, applying port-wide conditions to one facility is a little bit tricky. So if we're saying, I mean, we can say, or we can talk about port-wide issues, and we are, but recognizing that Huna Totem doesn't have any control over what happens at the AJ dock or the Franklin dock. And so that's something that we need to recognize and care for within this lease, that we're not somehow requiring them to have some sort of authority over somebody else's property that they don't actually have.
Very good, thanks for that. Ms. Pierce, I had a question, and it will just help me as we try to give you direction. So recognizing that, you know, this is early on in the process, and that we'll have public, as we just already decided, and public process, you know, presented to us in a COW, and then it sounds like it actually might be an ordinance. So then, you know, introduction and then public comment and the full assembly. So do you just want ideas that you'll then be bringing to the public for their feedback? Or I guess how will you use these, you know, these condition, I guess the elements? Like I'm just trying to figure out, you know, what you need and how you'll use them.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think what's important here is that I want to understand what's important to the assembly at the outset of the public process, so that I don't come back at the very end and say, here's a draft lease, and somebody's like, but what about whatever, you know, what about this thing that really matters to me? How come this isn't in there? So I would rather hear from you now, hear from you on the things that matter to you. It was very instructive for me to hear the Q&A with Ms. Bell and Ms. Weir, and I think even from the discussion we've had tonight, I've gleaned a lot more about what the assembly's thinking about and what matters to the assembly, that's giving me the information that I need to bring this forward and eventually work with Huna Totem to come up with something that doesn't contain any surprises for you.
Totally makes sense. Thank you. That's super helpful, and I probably should have chatted with you about it before tonight. So apologies for that. Okay. Now, how to efficiently and effectively gather that feedback from our assembly. Madam Mayor, did you have a suggestion?
I would just go down through everybody and see what they have to say.
Very good. Would anyone like to start? Ms. Wall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, just this has been helpful, and I think you know, I'm on a similar page as many of my other assembly members. Looking at the list that Ms. Pierce started with, I mean, I think there are some things that, you know, I would want to eliminate that feel like, you know, ideas people had that maybe don't make sense for the project anymore. Housing being one of those. The downtown passenger shuttle, I think, was something that isn't, you know, in either the applicant or the city's plans. Meeting space, I don't know how, if that's a high need or part of the applicants, but those are the ones that kind of jumped out at me as potentially easy to cross off the list. I like the other ones on the list, and I certainly want kind of traffic considerations added if we feel dissatisfied with what the traffic study comes up with.
Very good, thank you. Mayor Weldon.
I would concur with everything Ms. Wall said, although I am a fan of meeting space and I think they were working with some groups. So, and the only other thing that I would touch beside the navigability study, that's huge, is just to keep poking at that, what they mean by electrified dock. To make sure that they're just not ending up with a cord and then AMP will have to spend millions to make something happen there. But other than that, I don't see anything else I would die on my sword for.
Very good. Mayor, Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. I think I am, yeah, my concern, I think going through, going forward is the cruise ship limit, the passenger limits. I realize this is kind of meant to be a long-term lease, so maybe I would be flexible in considering something like perhaps like having some sort of say in scheduling, like maybe if things change and we can kind of have some sort of say in how things operate in that regard. So I think I'm flexible. I just want to be able to care for the community concerns that people have around cruise ship in that are docked and passengers coming off the boats, and how we do that. I'm flexible with.
Thank you. Miss you, Scandies.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, all good thoughts being shared. I think just from where my mind is at, the things that are priorities for me, icebreaker, Coast Guard, I'm just going to keep coming back to Coast Guard is huge because, again, I get that they'll advocate for themselves, but as far as for us, that's something that we have to like actively be managing and planning on this end. And I think very understandably, because the world changes and we've had unexpected things come up, but I feel slightly behind on that. So with this project, I want to make sure that doesn't impact that. And then it sounds like there's a lot of partnerships and a lot of good intention, but year-round life in this space, and hearing that it can be a requirement, that's a real priority to me, and it becomes attractive. And I get it also kind of feels like extra, you know, putting on the chains to somebody's development. But I feel like if we don't do that, we are extending the dead zone further into town. And for me, that's just too far into town that I would be comfortable with if it was not active year round. And then the management agreement element, I very much liked the words that, or however she characterized that. Ms. Bell made, I think we do have an opportunity to do something innovative and, you know, another sort of, what's the word, inaugural kind of agreement between, you know, a community and a corporation where it would work best for both of us. But we know that how hard it is to manage things like best ship at best dock, and that has been just from the beginning of the VITF recommendation. So some kind of built-in something, and I understand that's super sensitive, but that's where we find ourselves because we're talking about adding a dock, and it's a really big community issue. So those are kind of the big three for me.
Thank you. Ms. Hall.
Yeah, and looking at this list, the housing, obviously, her explanation why that doesn't work makes perfect sense. The year-round access with the partnership with Sea Alaska and also Centennial Hall being right close by, I kind of wonder about having that as a requirement. I would say allow the partners to be flexible in their use of that space and not necessarily make it a requirement if there wasn't the need for that, you know, if you know, school groups coming through, you know, they've got Sea Alaska as well to be able to have cultural events there. So the meeting space, I wonder why and for whom, but it sounds like Mayor Beth did have some thoughts on that. Downtown passenger shuttle, again, you know, the circulator idea hasn't exactly gotten off the ground, so I don't know that should necessarily be a requirement. And did I hear that the water access might be available just right down the Seawalk and on CBJ property? I'm not sure if I heard that correct, but I don't know that should be a requirement if a reasonable accommodation can be made nearby. And yeah, I think those were my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hall. Mr. Steininger.
I think I'll probably be echoing a lot of what other people have said, but you know, I really, looking at the stipulations that we put into the lease agreement, like I'm looking at it thinking more about the things that are really germane to, you know, what impacts the city the most in terms of our use of the adjoining properties. So the things related to the Seawalk, how that fits in. I know Mayor Weldon had the question looking at the designs of kind of more the feel of the Seawalk and that vision of what that is running through all of our town, and making sure that, you know, that is a piece that they're being cooperative in those design requirements where it, you know, where the use by the person feels more like it's a city, like the city's development of the Seawalk, and not just being on, you know, a Hunatotum development. Like there needs to be some cohesion there, and making sure that as, you know, the properties that abut their property, that we're caring for those access issues. I kind of share Maureen's concern a little bit on the Ms. Hall's concern a little bit on the, you know, hard stipulation that there be year-round access or year-round use. While I think it's something that I really like hearing from them, that is their intention, and that's what needs to be happening. And I think that's a positive thing. I also don't want a dead zone, you know, getting extended more into town, even though that area right now is a dead zone during the winter, as is. But having that kind of stipulation in the lease agreement, that may be something that we're going to live with for 35 years, you know, could be problematic in the long term if, you know, a year-round use becomes non-viable for their operations in a broader scale. So I don't know if there's a way to be more wishy-washy in that requirement in the document, but yeah, I do have concerns with holding their feet to the fire over things that we can't control in, you know, 10, 15, 20 years.
Thank you. Ms. Atkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, going to be echoing a lot of the things people already mentioned, so I'll just emphasize what Ms. Huskandies was saying about working with the Coast Guard and icebreaker things. It's important, even if they're going to advocate for themselves, for us to be a good community partner in that. So I think this is a good way to accomplish that, or at least start that process. The mayor mentioned meeting space. I want to emphasize that as well, especially for legislative session. That is really important. Part of being a good capital city is having spaces for legislative events, receptions, that sort of thing. I do tend to lean more towards having language in there about year-round use, but that is a good point that Mr. Steininger made. Maybe something like a percentage of spaces being year-round, or best efforts toward year-round use, something in there, but not making it a hard line, it must happen all the time language. I'm not sure how to accomplish that, but I concur with Mr. Steininger.
Excellent, thanks all. I don't, a lot of good comments here. I guess I'll just flag a few that either echo or have my own. Looking at the Visitor Industry Task Force report, it does, talk about how this area for development could leverage other community goals, sea walk, small boat harbor, berthing for small cruise ships, ocean center, home porting of small ships. I guess obviously we're not requiring them to do any of those things, but I just want to make sure, that this development would hopefully not prohibit those possible uses in that kind of adjoining property. Again, it sounds like that won't be the case, and that it'd actually make it better. But anyway, that's one for me. I appreciated Mr. Steininger's comments on the Seawalk connection and making it feel like it's not just driving them, into the front of a retail shop or into a restaurant or something. I also think I'd have to look at their design again, but making sure that there's a way for people to move through the site without having to, walk by retail, and I'm near certain that they have that. And then I'm still, obviously we all want year-round activity there. Once I broach the question, anyway, we'll learn more and think more about should that be a requirement or is that not? But I still think there should be a priority and encouragement or whatever given for year-round activity. But anyway, more to come there. Okay, Ms. Pierce, do you have what you need on these items?
Mr. Chair, if I can read my own handwriting and the furious notes that I was taking, I have what I need. Thank you very much for your input.
Very good. We are recording, so there's that too. All right. If
And
nothing
Mr.
more on those,
Chair?
yes.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. Just for the record, Miss Wall is having to do some transportation issues, and she is listening in via her phone, but not on the camera, the Zoom,
Okay.
but she is still in the meeting.
Okay, very good. Thank you for that. All right. Moving on to the next item, mid-year update. And this is from Miss Flick. Miss Flick, welcome. And
Good afternoon or evening. All right, you should be able to see a single PowerPoint slide saying fiscal update.
yes, we
Is that
do.
correct? Excellent. This is a regular update that the Assembly receives on our financial condition. It is intentionally set to happen right before the retreat. So one of the things that we want to prepare you for is the conversation that we'll have on Saturday. We'll be wrapping up our conversation here with some specific questions for you to think about and respond to on Saturday, not necessarily tonight, but what will be super helpful for us is understanding what questions or additional information you might want to have for the Saturday's budget direction conversation. So with that kind of a setup, I will give you an update of where we are financially, and I've got my slide set up. I can't necessarily see hands, but I'm sure that the chair will stop me if you all have questions. So, we're just starting out with the fact that there is a never-ending need for resources. It is amazing that since the budget was approved in June, there's been approval for $6.5 million of different fund balance uses. And we just listed them out for you here. Some of these were fresh appropriations. Some of them you deappropriated, some were to reappropriate somewhere else. So it's a combination of various activities. But just in the few short months since the budget was approved, a lot has been happening in the community, and you have provided a lot of funding. So just wanted to bring that to the front and center. The other thing that we wanted to definitely put in front of you tonight was, as we're preparing for our budget conversations and you start hearing little rumblings, we kind of made a quick list. This is not definitive. This is not the ask, but there's well over probably $30 million worth of requests that are headed your direction in various forms. And so we just took a moment to kind of capture some of those things to give you an idea. And this list excludes anything coming from the community. These are all things within kind of the normal CBJ realm that is likely coming to you in some form or another. These are rough estimates. I do want to point out the last item on the list is the change in expenses because of the negotiated collective bargaining agreements. And that is a big unknown. So one of the hard things about preparing for FY26 budget is we know that we've got 3 collective bargaining units. We're about to start negotiations with all of them. And certainly what's decided through them over the 3-year period that they cover, but the timing of any changes will have a huge impact on our operating budget. So that's just, it's not at the bottom of the list because it's least important. It's going to have a huge impact on our budget, and the timing of those negotiated agreements being resolved is going to be difficult to plan for. So I just want to set that in your mind as we're moving forward. The other thing I wanted to just bring your attention to is your resolution 2629, section 1, which is about the restricted budget reserve. We look at our revenue. We're coming out of several years where we had inflated revenue because of COVID dollars flowing through. And so we're kind of normalizing, if you will. So our general government kind of revenue is 151 million. 2 months reserve, we call 16.7%. So our restricted budget reserve should be at about 25 million. You'll see that 25 million pop up here in a few slides as well. Wanted to also, as we're setting the stage for our finances, just a reminder that the assembly funds a lot of activity that happens outside of the city proper. So $16 to $17 million over the last couple of years, and they go to various causes, taking care of services sometimes that the city would have to do on our own if we didn't have another organization to care for, and others are important to the community. And so you have funded a variety of different things in FY24, but also through your planning for budget in 25, have quite a bit budgeted that goes outside of the city. So where did we end FY24? We're working through the last steps of our audit, working to get our financials published. So before I get into kind of our financial position, I just want to take a minute to talk about three terms that get thrown around a lot. And so we'll just have a quick educational moment to talk about what the budget is versus actuals versus the forecast. So the budget is the assembly approved or amended through ordinance expenditure and revenue. So it is a forecast, but it is your plan for FY25. It clearly articulates what is expected for revenues and amounts that are authorized for expenses. And so that budget document is our plan. Actuals are what really happens in real life. So you might plan for $1 million worth of salaries, but your actual expenditures and salaries might be $925,374.22. Those would be the actuals, things that truly occurred. And that happens both on the revenue side and on the expense side. And then forecast is just our projection or a prediction of what is going to happen. And so why do we care about that? In June of 2023, the Assembly approved the FY24 budget. Right. A year ago, we did a fiscal update, much like we're doing now. And then in April of 24, the Assembly was provided with a forecast that estimated our FY24 revenues and expenditures and how much we thought would be available then for fund balance for the Assembly to appropriate or not through the budgeting process. And so by the time we get to the end of June of 24, the fiscal year's ending, but you've approved, the 25 budget was approved. So now today we're going to give you an update on what really happened in 24 and what we're seeing in 25. So I just wanted to have that educational moment on budget, actual forecast, because we're about to look through those terms quite a bit. So let's talk about the revenue side of FY24. These are, again, we're looking at general government operations, so more general fund, sales tax focused. Our 24 budget had $143 million worth of revenue. We came in at 151, almost 152 million. And so that is a pickup of about 8.7 million. Before we get too excited about that, when we built our budget, we planned to have 145, 146 million. So our pickup from the plan when we built our 25 budget is only about 6 million. And looking at where that impact came, our investments really gave us a lift as far as revenue above expectations and above forecast. There's a few reasons for that. One is the market volatility is always dynamic and unexpected, and we don't like to plan for a lot of our operating expenses just from interest earnings. And so this will always be just a little bit on the conservative side. But we also entered calendar year 24 with this expectation that the Fed was going to cut rates early and often, that we're coming out of inflation and they were going to start cutting rates and work towards a soft landing. The first rate cut didn't happen till the fall. And so the market was much stronger than we anticipated coming through calendar year 24. Sales tax was the other thing I wanted to mention. For those of you who were part of the budget last year, you may recall that our FY24 sales tax is lowered by 3.4 million because of a reporting error from a merchant that happened as the fiscal year crossed. So our 23 actual revenue was higher than it should have been, and that correction was made in FY24. So our sales tax, while it is under budget, is not terribly alarming because we know we had that correction happen in 24 that's artificially lowering that in our actuals. So at the end of the day, our revenues were strong, but really what what helped us out the most was a strong market. If we flip to the other side of general government operations, the expense side, you can see that we had $100 million in planned expenditures in these categories. Our actuals were 90 million. And again, before we get too excited about that, we had already planned, instead of 100 million, we'd planned to have 94 million. So we only picked up an additional 4 million. Most of that is where you would expect to see that in personnel, various personnel expenses, and services and commodities. And some of that is actual savings. We bought things that just cost less. We negotiated new contracts. And part of that is things that didn't arrive in 24. And so those items will shift to 25. We spend a lot of time talking about the general government operations, but also under your purview are non-general government. And so if there are questions, I'm happy to get additional details, but we wanted to give you a high level on the expense side of the various department and or funds, what their budget was, what their actual expenses were, and their all of them came in under budget. And various percentages.
Thank you, Ms. Flick. Mayor Weldon had a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Flick, for hanging in with us tonight. Could you touch a little bit on risk management and also Bartlett?
Certainly, Mayor Weldon, there are a few things happening with risk management. Partially it's claims. And I do believe we renegotiated, but I will get more precise detail on the risk management costs, unless Mr. Barr, if you have anything you want to add.
Claims was good enough. I just wanted to see what the difference was.
And then Bartlett, I will have to get more detail on that. They're only 4% under budget. Their budget is just so large. But I can get more detail for you on that.
Ms. Flick, I was also kind of curious about wastewater, and anyway, just general stuff, like, was it staff or was it, anyway, what was the reason for being under budget there?
Certainly, Chair Smith, wastewater I know has significant salary savings, but I can also get some more details on other savings that impacted that $2.6 million.
Sounds good. And before Saturday isn't necessary, but at some point in the budget process, I'd be interested. Thank you. Ms. Uskandis.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And similarly, not a before Saturday project, just, an email project. You don't have to get into it now, but I think just as once we get into the meat of the budget, I know you said it's kind of split between commodities and personnel, but those ones, we have several that are like nearly 20% under budget. So that's significant enough for me to want to, follow up. We can just do that offline and figure that out. Thanks.
Absolutely.
And Ms. Wall has a question as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Quick question on the investment windfall. Is there a reason we don't find out about that until now? Like, we didn't anticipate that we would be that much over our budget in April. How do we kind of discover that at the end of the year?
Great question, Ms. Wall. Part of that is the process through which we allocate our interest earnings to the various funds. So from a budgeting perspective, we budget by funds, and from an investment perspective, we take the whole pool and invest it. And so part of our process at the end of the year is to look at all of the all of the funds that have a fund balance, and capital projects are a big area where we have funds that are appropriated and available for use for projects that are in various stages of being spent. And so part of the process of our annual close is to work through and reconcile all the capital projects and the funds, and then allocate interest out of the general fund. And one of the things that was surprising this year was the amount of interest that left the general fund was lower this year, meaning those other funds spent down fund balances, and again, mostly through capital projects. And that just, until we got through all of the capital projects and reconciling those out for the year, we didn't see that earlier. We've talked about turnover in finance in our accounting group and our year-end process, and we're working towards ways of allocating out that interest on a more regular basis instead of just waiting until the end of the year, so that we're not so surprised at the end of the year that so much stays with the general fund.
Very good. I don't see any other questions. Please proceed.
Okay. So when we talk about our process and we get ready to build a budget, so when we were ready to build the FY25 budget, we brought forward a forecast. And this is one of the pages in the back of the budget book that many of you are used to seeing. And the number that we typically key in on is here in this red box. And it says, you know, this was the assembly adopted budget. We account for changes that were approved. And then we anticipate different variances. So this is where you can see that we forecasted that we would have about $4 million in salary type savings and $1 million in non-salary type savings. And so when you started the budget process, we estimated that we would have 22 million in unrestricted fund balance and 15 million in restricted fund balance. And that included the loan to the school district, which they ended up not using, and also an increase because of loan repayments through the COVID emergency loan program that JEDC administered. So I'm going to move to the next slide, but visually, I captured this last line and I'm going to paste it at the bottom of the next slide. So you can see it down here. There's your 22 million and your 15 million. This is what actually happened for FY24. So instead of ending up with 22 million in your unrestricted fund balance, you ended up with 32 million. And again, that's the actual increase in revenue and the additional savings on the expense side. You'll also see that your restricted fund balance went from 15 million to 19 million because again, the school district didn't take out that loan. And so this is one of the ways that we walk through the changes in the fund balance, and you can see the various actions and items that contributed to the change in the fund balance. So I'm going to move away from 24 unless there's questions. There's a question.
Mayor Weldon.
Thank you, Ms. Flick. So trying to follow this along, you should be aware that half this graph is cut off. Is there any way we can get these graphs between now and Saturday printed out differently?
Sure.
Maybe it's
Absolutely.
maybe it's just my packet, but I've lost. I only have revenues, expenditures, and surplus, and then everything else is cut off.
I will PDF this presentation and email it to the assembly.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Absolutely.
And I believe that it is in the online packet accurately. It's just the paper packets that got printed were, I don't know what was going on with the printer last week, and our print shop operator last week, so it was yours truly trying to do tech, which I am not an expert in, and my apologies.
Thank you, Clerk Beth. Other questions on 24 before we move into 25? All right. So for 25, this is the same kind of look for you. And this shows the various funding sources that we started out with, where the Assembly's taken action or has an action in process to expend funds or deappropriate and reappropriate. And so the question I get asked most often is, what's our fund balance? This is the page. 15.7 million in unrestricted fund balance, and we're at 13 million in our restricted budget reserve. And I'll just note again that if we adhere to the resolution, we would be aiming to get that back up to 25. And we know that some things like the glacial outburst flood response, we know that that was taken from restricted budget reserve because we anticipate that we're being reimbursed from the state. So some of that will happen naturally. Some of this we'll need to care for through our budget process.
Ms. Flick, I probably should have thought more about this, but I'm just noticing it now. So in the FY25 adopted budget, we have 20 million in the restricted budget reserve. It looks like we're, currently spending 3.5 million out of it. How does the math get us to 13?
That's a great question. The math is going to not start with the adopted. It's going to start with your year-end projected. But 19 minus 3.5 is not 13. So that is a great question, which I will phone a friend to Adrian, who helped me prepare this, and we will work through our math.
Okay, thank you. I mean, we should probably always feel a little bit of stress to make sure that budget reserve, but maybe that'll help us feel less bad about ourselves. So thank you if you let us know.
Yes. And I'd like to not wait till Saturday. I would like to get that answer to you way before Saturday.
Okay, thank you.
A couple of things I wanted to point out from our budget process and our budget summary. We had a $17.5 million of one-time expenditures included in our budget. And the 3 items that are in green are items that are operating in nature that were funded as one-time expenditures. One of the things that also was included in the budget, so we have a lot of one-time expenditures, but occasionally we do have one-time revenue. And last year we did have $2.5 million of one-time revenue that was coming in associated with the Triangle Dock project. It was intended for the marine passenger fees, I believe, to pay for that. Once that process moved through and that time came in the FY25 timeframe, we'll be getting that $2.5 million back. But as we look forward to FY26, one of the things we'll talk about is wanting to make sure that our recurring expenses have a recurring funding source for them. In FY25, part of your direction was to be aggressive or ambitious in our revenue forecasting for our budget. And so I want to give you an update on the first quarter revenue. So again, our budget was built with kind of a more aggressive stance than a more conservative stance. And you can see our various forms of tax, sales tax, liquor tax, marijuana tax, the budget, the actual, and we are only about $400,000 over our budget thus far. And on the books is the July, August, September quarter of sales tax. So one of the two big sales tax quarters is included in this. The other thing I wanted to point out is our property tax is almost $1 million under budget. That can be from a lot of different things. We have some people who pay late. We have exemptions that come through and are approved by the body. What's not reflected in this as of yet is any disaster relief reductions. So this may go down a little bit. It also will likely recover just a little bit as people make their property tax payments throughout the year. We always look at sales tax graphically. So again, I'm going to point out that FY23 is about $3 million too much. FY24 is about $3 million too little. The blue is our actual, so that would put our 71 million in a more kind of staircase fashion with the adjustment to 23 and 24. We only have 1 quarter recorded, so you see that there, and then our forecast is about $400,000 more than our budget right now, just from a good solid summer season. Going into 26. Big red letters. Everything that we're presenting here and talking about has no authority from the assembly. It is to seed ideas and share information so that we can have a good conversation on Saturday at the retreat about the budget, and you can provide your direction as the assembly to the manager. So I don't know how many ways I can say that, but I felt like I needed to put that out there in big letters. Without any guidance from the assembly, if we were to build a budget today, here are some of the assumptions that we would start out with, and look for your input around. So this will be one of the questions for Saturday, is how do you feel about these assumptions? So we anticipate kind of a normal inflation for Alaska. Perhaps some prices coming down in areas. As inflation increases, obviously on the expense side, it's going to cost more for certain commodities, services, different supplies, but it also means that sales tax revenue goes up because the cost of the goods go up. So it's one of those that hits both sides of our revenue and expense equation. The national GDP is expected to grow about 2.1% in calendar year 25. We are anticipating tourism to be relatively flat compared to last summer. With cruise ship activity and other tourism, we're not seeing anything that would make us believe that we would see a big jump or a big dip in tourism. I've already spoken about salaries. We just don't know how much of a wage increase we will see through the negotiated collective bargaining agreements. One of the things that we are doing more actively and aggressively is looking at where we have departments that aren't filling positions, and why aren't they filling them, and should we be assuming that there's more savings as we build a budget. We don't want to put departments in a position where they feel like they can't fill positions because they've got a budget constraint, but we do want to build a realistic budget as well. So we're analyzing that. In the FY25 budget, we increased salary savings or vacancy factors in 5 or 6 different departments that had seen, and we're continuing to see vacancies for various reasons. Right now, we are planning for a 0% increase in employer paid benefits costs to the departments. And that's based on a combination of claims trends and the fund balance that is available to offset claims and our various policies. So right now, no increase in that area. Property assessments, as we're looking at the revenue side, I would assume a flat property assessment. Last year's growth was only 0.6%. We're still looking at sales data as it applies, particularly to the Mendenhall Valley area, where the flooding occurred this August, to see what kind of change that area might see due to that. Mayor Weldon.
Thank you, Mr. Director, Ms. Director, since the chair is in tennis shoes. How much can you attribute that to, if you know, and this isn't something we need to know by Saturday by any stretch of the imagination, property coming off the tax rolls?
Because of the flood?
No, just properties that are tax exempt, or entities that are tax exempt buying property, and then it comes off the tax rolls.
I don't even have a guess for you at this point, but that's something I can look at to see if we can nail down.
Again, not by Saturday by any stretch of the imagination. Just,
okay.
I get asked that a lot.
We do know that this isn't precisely your question, Mayor Weldon, but we do know that our community is aging in general. So we do have more and more folks that are eligible for the senior exemption, which it doesn't take away usually doesn't take away their entire property value, but is a good value of exemption. Let's see, property assessment. So the next thing is general receipts. So where we're charging for swim lessons or permitting fees or other things like that. Assuming a 2% growth. Really, we're just seeing, participation in a lot of those programs growing in a modest amount. So that would be an assumption. Undertaking a structurally balanced budget for FY26 would be an assumption, meaning again that we've got recurring revenue that's sufficient to pay for our recurring expenses. And part of what we do when we're building the budget through the process is we have your direction after Saturday of what to include in the manager's proposed budget, how to go through the budget. And we look at all of our major revenue sources, with the final piece being that area-wide property tax mill rate. And we back into that in order to have enough recurring revenue to pay for those recurring expenses. And to say that another way would just be not using one-time funding for operating expenses. The other assumption that we're working forward is that the FY26 debt service mill rate would be flat from FY25, which is at 1.08. There are some risks that I want to just say out loud as we're getting, as you're thinking about the direction that you want to give the manager for preparing FY26 budget. Property valuation was nearly flat last year, 0.6%. It just seems like the market is slowing. We're not seeing those skyrocketing sales, which is escalating price. We're seeing, just kind of a stagnation in property values, which is good in a lot of ways, but it does mean that it's not an area of just natural growth from a revenue perspective. We could see potential reduction in assessed property values due to additional exemptions, whether that's state imposed or whether there's more people applying or late filing approvals that come through the assembly. There could also be some, and I would expect some property valuation decrease due to the flood related properties. And that exact amount isn't quite known yet, although we will know that by the time we get to our actual budget conversation in the spring. Wage negotiations, I've said it a number of times, big if out there, and it can have a large impact. You've heard about this from multiple areas, probably through various committees, just, being aware of our aging infrastructure, whether that's physical infrastructure like the wastewater treatment plant that was just approved by voters to have some bond funding, or whether it's software or other things out there. There's another risk for the 26 budget is just an expectation of community grants and subsidies. We've had a lot of years where a lot of funds have flowed through and have been available to the community. And so that's, something to be aware of that could be a risk. We were aggressive in the 25 budgeting of revenues. And we came in really close. So, yes, as your finance director, that makes me nervous. I would step back just a little bit. We don't have to be crazy, but finding that spot where we're not ending up with a windfall at the end of the year that's astronomically huge, but we're definitely building a budget based on revenues that are realistic. And then an ongoing concern is just the continuing shift of funding from federal and state governments to local government. We've got a change in party in Washington, D.C. Unsure what impacts will flow down to the local jurisdictions and at what time. So it's not, it's the shift of local governments, you get to pay for it, is not new, and will definitely continue to be a concern as we move forward. So just doing some quick math to give you, just kind of some sort of concept. We would expect that natural operational expenditures would increase and be offset by natural revenue increases. And that would exclude picking up one-time funding that should have really been operational. It excludes any operational asks that we believe are coming. Eagle Crest support, which was funded one time, homelessness support, childcare, and that excludes negotiated wage changes. So if we did rough math and looked at our FY25 budget and included in the assumptions that we just talked about, added into operating those one-time things that should be operating, look at some of the asks that we think would likely gain support, communications, Eagle Crest, some other areas that the Assembly has traditionally funded, we're easily at a $5 million increase to the operating budget. Natural revenue growth will give us about $2 million to offset it, so we need to come up with $3 million of additional funding to keep that recurring revenue in line with our recurring expenses. If all we did was adjusted the mill rate for it, and again, this is just talking hypothetical, so you have things to think about, it would require the mill rate to go to 10.44 compared to 10.04 where it is today. So again, just quick math, just want to, big global picture. Those are some things to think about as we're looking forward to next year's budget. And along those lines, just as you're kind of thinking about how the numbers work, you can, for every $1 million that we add to the budget, if it's only offset by mill rate, it's about a 0.16 increase. There can be other ways to finance or other ways to generate revenue. And so again, just hypothetically thinking, if there were a desire to have a different summer sales tax than a winter forecast, and the summer were increased by 0.5%, it'd be about $4 million of increased revenue just based on what FY25 budgeted sales tax looked like. For about every 0.5% that you would add in that 6-month period, you'd see about another $4 million. April through September represents our busiest time at 65% of our reported sales tax. So just to kind of give you some ideas. Last thing I want to touch on before we get to our questions for Saturday is our debt service mill rate. So last year, the debt service mill rate was reduced to 1.08. The voters in October approved 2 different bond measures. We have not actually issued those yet, so they're not on our books yet, but we built out a structure that would keep basically a flat debt service rate for a couple of years, and then you would see the natural drop off of that as other debt is retired. So that is how this particular chart was constructed. We look at it kind of every year. And if you want to think about like what's our capacity, if you were to just take this 1.08 out in a straight line, all of the area underneath that line, but above the red would kind of be the area that we would have to take on debt without having to raise the debt service mill rate.
Like
So,
oh, and Mr. Kelly also has a question. Mr. Kelly, go ahead.
Thank you. So I was just kind of thinking about inflation, which is you know, kind of always an unknown, and how sales tax kind of tracks with inflation. But I was also kind of wondering how valuations and income from the mill rate, if there's a much of a lag, like if we experienced higher inflation than we expected, would we maybe see something of a gap between increased revenues and expenses? And how long maybe would it take to catch up?
so if I understand your question correctly, Mr. Kelly, inflation is going to increase our expenses. And your question is, how long does it take us to catch up on the revenue side because of the sales tax? Did I understand your question correctly?
Almost. So sales tax, to my understanding, you know, kind of probably tracks almost exactly as things go up. Our sales tax revenue goes up. I'm also thinking about our kind of other main source of revenue, income that we bring in through the mill rate, and I'm kind of wondering about how if there's any sort of lag between that and inflation.
So the mill rate, which is set by the assembly, multiplied by the property values. Property values are assessed to be close to market value. And so if we're seeing inflation at the grocery store and other things that we purchase, it doesn't necessarily mean that the real estate market is increasing. So real estate would need to increase in order for your property tax revenue to stay the same if you did not increase the mill rate percent. Does that make sense? So you need the value times the rate to get the revenue. So if you want to keep the rate to not change, so like if it were to say 10.04, the only way that you would get a revenue increase would be for the market value to increase. And I don't know that you could correlate inflation to real estate valuation very directly.
Okay, I think I might follow up with you a little more offline. I think my question probably
Okay.
a little more complex to kind of state succinctly in a committee of the whole meeting.
Okay.
Ms. Flick, I had a question on the debt service mill rate. So, and you may have said it, I just want to repeat it to make sure I understand. The way we structured the 2024 approved bonds approved by the voters, that leads us to a mill rate of 1.08. Like that is what's required to pay our debt service. It's not above, like I believe has happened in past years.
Chair Smith, what we are proposing to do is structure the debt such that the debt service mill rate does not have to increase for the two items that were voter approved in October. That being said, if the body desired to say front load the debt, so it required more than the 1.08, that could be done. But the intent that we walked away with through the budgeting process was to use the debt service mill rate that you all landed at last year, the 1.08, and basically fill that in with the newly approved debt and structure the debt that way.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. You answered my question.
Excellent. So the 4 questions that we want to tee up for us to discuss on Saturday, and I certainly will welcome Manager Kester to join in and wrap up with any other comments that she has. But really, what's the comfort level with the assumptions that were presented on slide 20 in your deck? Do you want to explore any revenue changes? Do you wish to adjust any levels of service? And do you want to consider any bond initiatives for October 2025? And those would be what we would desire to learn from you to help, give the manager direction as we go forward and build the budget. Manager Kester, did you have anything you wanted to add to that? Or Mr. Barr?
You might have nailed it. Unless they do have anything they want to add, but
I don't see anybody jumping up and down.
Okay. Director Flick, thank you very much. Very insightful, useful information. There were some things I think you're planning to get back to us at either before Saturday or after. I guess from the assembly, again, my sense is that, we need to be prepared to answer those questions on Saturday, but we don't need to be prepared to answer them tonight. Is there other information the assembly desires before Saturday that would help them answer those questions? I think you could have them now would be great. I also think, tomorrow would also be fine, but realizing it does take some work to get some of this stuff. Anything from the assembly? It looks like we're good. So thank you very much, Ms. Flick. Again, very useful and informative. And you have some homework, but again, we also know it's a busy week and there's only so many more days in it. So thank you. Okay, moving on and seeing no other anything from the assembly. Next up, we have executive session. Madam Mayor, a motion, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move the assembly enter into executive session to discuss matters the immediate knowledge of which could have a detrimental effect on city finances, specifically an update on collective bargaining.
Very good. Mr. Barr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick note that you have an email from Clerk McEwen. She is back. That is the email from her contains your link for executive session.
Very good. How about we fire up over there in 7 minutes, so 9:05. How does that sound? Okay.
And Mr. Chair, before you adjourn, can we just let the watching audience know if the Assembly Committee of the Whole intends on coming back after executive session, or are you going to end the public session at this point?
I think unless there's staff reports, which I don't believe there are, our next meeting date, let me scramble very quickly to find that, unless someone has that on the tip of their tongue. Those are the only other really things before we would adjourn. Oh, there we go. Our next meeting date for the committee of the whole would be the 27th of January. Is that correct, Madam Clerk?
Correct.
Okay.
And I wasn't sure if you were gonna schedule a different committee of the whole in light of Ms. Pierce's presentation, but yes, January 27th is the next scheduled COW.
Very good point. Unknown on the additional scheduling, so we'll just say the next scheduled one is the 27th of January, but I don't believe I believe we can adjourn the public session now at this point. Not seeing anything else from the assembly or from staff. So everyone is free to go, and assembly will see you at 9:07 in the new Zoom link.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Mr.
everyone.